So I did my funeral home visit at the Franklin Funeral Home, which is not too far from my house. And the funeral director is actually the father of one of my younger sister's close friends from second and third grade. It's her father, and he's been a funeral director for a while now. So I reached out to him, and he was very friendly, very open to have me come in and to give me a tour and show me around. So it was nice that I kind of knew the person who was the funeral director and knew a lot about the business. And Franklin Funeral Home is not too far from my house. Like I said, it's about a 5-minute drive, and it's located in Franklin Square on Long Island. And it's on a really very busy street. It's right across the street from a Catholic school, a church, and it's on the corner of a major intersection. For those of you who are familiar with Long Island, it's off of Jericho Turnpike. So it's off of a really busy street on a lot of traffic in that area. And the first thing that I noticed is pulling into the funeral home was like a nightmare, and having to wait for traffic on both sides and the parking, and it was crazy, and I was immediately overwhelmed getting there. So I figured if you're a family who's just trying to get to their funeral services in a moment of really stressful time in your life, I was like, this is automatically adding stress on top of stress. But inside the funeral home, it was very lovely. It was very standard. They had 3 rooms in the main floor, their office, and they had the downstairs, which was kind of the off-limits section. But I wasn't allowed to take pictures because there was a family arriving a little bit in the time that I was going to be there. I didn't bump into them, but he said, just in case, I don't want somebody walking around taking pictures, which I thought was really respectful on his end. He has been in the funeral business for the last 23 years. His father owned the funeral home that he works in, and he originally didn't want to go into the funeral business, and he got his CPA license, and he was a CPA for a while, but then his father asked him to come in and take over the business, and he's been in it for 23 years. So he's become really accustomed to and is very well versed in the funeral home life, and he's been enjoying it, so it seems. But he has been working in the funeral home since he was about 14, because it was a family business. Moving on to the next slide. I asked him a lot about the different cultures of who he serves and the families, and he said that he mostly sees Catholic, Christian, Greek Orthodox, Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim families. He said he sees it all, and over the years it has changed a lot, from being a very Irish Catholic Christian funeral home, being that they are across the street from St. Catherine's, to now it's very, very mixed, and he sees a lot of different cultures, immigrants, people from all over the country and all over the world. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that he mentioned to me was that he has families from all over the country have reached out to him and have sent their deceased and their loved ones to his facility to be cremated and then shipped back. And he said that has been one of the biggest changes, a really big increase in that, and not only all over the country but all over the world. He said he has a huge Indian population that sends them their loved ones and the deceased and is brought back. They'll either send the body over with a family member or a loved one, or sometimes it's just the body by itself and then it's sent back, and that business is coming in through mostly social media. So I thought that was really interesting, and he talked a lot about that. So he talked a bit about what the role of a funeral director is, and he said it's you help guide people through a really hard and traumatic part of their life, and it's the immediate loss and then the burial, or the cremation, whatever type of disposition they want to have, and you helping them through this whole process and helping them to grieve. And that's why a lot of people like to have an open casket, he says. It provides them with a lot of closure. And on his website, I included the link on this slide, or on the first slide. He has amazing resources on his website for families to go and learn about grief and how to help family members through grief. And yeah, it was just, I thought that was really great. It's just like the extra step that he brought to the table. Some common questions and practices that he has dealt with from family members over the years is he says he gets the most questions from people who have never buried a loved one before, and they just don't know the process at all. And going into this, I've lost both my grandmothers, but it was when I was younger and I wasn't involved in the funeral process at all. So I really went into this asking a lot of those same questions. What is available for them? Do most people have wakes? What's the process? What are the finances? How much is it going to cost? Where do we bury them? There's got to be a lot of confusion, and he says he takes everything with a grain of salt, and he takes everything step by step, and he's just really trying to help these people work through it. He did go into the expenses of how much a funeral is, and it is extremely expensive. It can be anywhere from $1,800 up to $12,000, and if you're going for a mausoleum, it can be, he said, some places $21,000. And that's just on his end. Those are just like his prices, but then you have to add in $5,000 for the local cemetery. Opening the grave is $2,000. It can be between $6,000 and $10,000 depending on what they want and the type of caskets they choose. And after we had my interview in his office, and then he walked me around a little bit to the basement, and it's like a showroom of all the different types of caskets and the lining and the pillows and everything that you want to go into. And there's wooden caskets and metal caskets and caskets with a brass bar and caskets that had a little shelf to put pictures or jewelry or items on. And walking into that room, I was like, this is overwhelming. And I was like, just so overwhelmed by how many options families they have to go through and they have to pick. And you just know that they're filled with sadness and grief, and then they have to go through this whole process of, do we spend a lot of money because they're a loved one? Can we afford a lot of money? And it just has to be really, really stressful. And seeing the room with everything in it was really, really a lot. So yeah, it's just all of that goes into it. And something that he brought up that I thought was really interesting was that millennials are the biggest population to request cremations. He's like, he didn't really know what it was. He just is something he noticed. He was like, people, with the recession and, finances and what people are going through now, it's cost effective to cremate a body than it is to bury a body. And he said, especially in the Indian culture, he said only the males can cremate the body, put the body into the crematorium, and then they take the ashes back to India and they scatter them in the river. He's like, this is a huge tradition, and it's really just kind of blown up this whole market of cremating. It sounds so cold when you talk about it in a business sense, but it's how he described it to me. And it's just everybody's requesting it now, and he said that's been one of the biggest changes for him. If we move on to slide number 5, remembering the deceased. He said there are many different things that they do to help families remember their loved ones. They make videos, they make photo collages. Sometimes if a police officer or a firefighter was lost, they do something with their badge number or their helmet number. Put on some little display if it's making it really, really personal. They do thumbprints, and they make them into jewelry. Some people, they take a handprint. One time he said somebody requested to take a handprint, and then it was made into a tattoo for that person. So he'll do anything that somebody requests. He says, we'll do anything you like, and those things do kind of delay the whole funeral and burial process, but whatever the family wants, he's there to, help them through it. Preparing the body, I asked him if all bodies get involved, and he said they don't have to be, but they do have to be if it's an open casket, and they do all of their embalming on site. I asked him what the difference between a casket and a coffin was. He said there's no difference. The coffin can sometimes have that octagonal top, very traditional, like old Italian, like craftsmanship. He thinks that might be the correct way to refer to a coffin. but he uses it interchangeably. And then we talked about when somebody dies in the hospital versus somebody dying at home, and he said that was another big change, is people used to always be dying in the hospital, and now more and more frequently people are dying in the home or in hospice. So something that he wished for hospital staff is don't lie to the families and don't promise when the body will be removed. Because he said that he had an incident once where apparently it's a New York state law that the families asked if they want their loved one to be a organ donor. And there was a miscommunication with one family who was from Indian descent, and organ donating is not something that's commonly practiced. So they had to get approval for the body to be removed, and he had already been called, so he showed up to take the body away. But the body hadn't been released yet, and he was like, it caused just like a lot of frustration for the family and for him and for the hospital, and these things really need to be communicated beforehand about when the body is ready to be picked up. But if somebody dies in the middle of the night, they either call the hospice nurse or they call him to come and retrieve the body to be brought to his funeral home. Moving on to self-care and memorable moments, I asked him if there was a time, he's been in the business for 23 years, and I was like, can you remember anything significant that's really stood out to you? And he said 16 years ago he had one weekend where there was a 12-year-old child who had died from cancer in one of his rooms, and then right next to it was a 4-year-old who had suffocated. So both obviously very devastating losses, and had huge outpours of support and people showing up for the wake. And he said it was extremely overwhelming, especially because at the time he had very young children, and it was just like a really memorable experience, obviously for lots of different reasons. And but since then he tries to keep a third-party perspective on things, and he said, you're not the center stage. You're supposed to be there to help them and support them through this really hard time in your life, and you don't always absorb and take in their grief, and it's hard to, I saw where he was coming from. He's like, it's hard to allow yourself to take everything in, but it's also hard to not take it in at all. So he's like, you kind of just have to keep yourself balanced. And for self-care, he likes to spend time with his family. If a case is getting really hard for him, he takes a couple days off, and he, steps back for a day or two. And he just reminds himself, like, you don't really know this person, so you try to keep a partial view and just try to get them through the process and, make it easier for them. So he was a very accommodating funeral director. He's a very nice person. And I asked him, what does he think the role of the child should be in all of this? And he said, I always tell parents or family members, don't force the kid to look at the body if they're not ready. Tell them everything. Tell them what's going to be inside. Tell them what they're going to see. And he's like, I always give the family a couple minutes alone in the room before the wake starts. And I said, if the kid doesn't want to do it, they don't have to. And he actually has a playroom and a TV room in his funeral home. The playroom, he said, it has lots of books, lots of games, like an Xbox. And then in the TV room, it was just like a couple couches and some chairs set up and DVDs and movies and TVs. And he's like, sometimes kids don't want to be a part of it. It's too overwhelming, or they don't understand. So they just kind of go and hang out in the playroom and be all together. So I thought that was really nice that he accommodated for children in that way. But overall, my lasting impressions, it was kind of, I think one of the biggest things he talked about was the different cultures and what people request, and how he has this outpouring just from social media. Like his website, people find him, and that's how he's getting people from all over the world, especially India, which I thought was really remarkable. And then again, all of the options that you have to go through, I didn't really realize the extent to what planning a funeral is. And it's like planning a small event, and to do that when you're at your so emotionally drained and raw, assuming, it could be such a really hard process. And I think that this guy is, he's really helping people through it. So I really enjoyed talking to him, and I really enjoyed seeing it from this perspective, and seeing it from the child life perspective. I think he's doing his best to accommodate children of all ages as best as he can and to be really understanding. So yeah, I learned a lot and I'm really glad that I was given this assignment. So thank you.